Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Udvaita Gadara Shriva Sari Gaura Bhakta Brinda. Hare Krishna. Back in 1983, I joined the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. About a year later, I found myself in the Los Angeles New Dwarka Dham, ISKCON Los Angeles, and I was telling the story of the pastime of Lord Nrsimhadeva to someone out in front of the temple there. And while I was telling the story, a Mataji, who I later learned is named Mother Vaibhavi, she was standing there and she was watching with great curiosity while I was telling the story and listening very carefully. And I was very curious why she was so interested. When I finished the story, she asked me if I had finished the story now. And very bewildered, and I said, yes. Why do you ask? And she explained to me that her and her husband, Charu Prabhu, run a radio station called KHQN in Spanish Fork, Utah, and that they actually have a little recording studio behind the Indian Life Membership guest house. And she said that she felt that I had a very good voice for broadcasting and asked if I would like to come and try it out. And I explained to her that actually that was the reason why I had left Hawaii, where I had joined. I was at New Navadweep, the ISKCON Hawaii Center in Honolulu, Nuuanu Valley, Valley of the Churches, the temples. That's why they call it Nuuanu Valley. Anyways, I was there for about 8 months, took initiation from Rameshwar Prabhu, and I felt as though I was not fulfilling my destiny. Prior to joining the movement, I had met this psychic, and she said that she envisioned me in a recording studio making these tapes. And so I carried that idea with me into the movement, and I wanted to do that. But they didn't have that sort of facility in Los Angeles, and I'd heard some wonderful productions that were produced in Los Angeles. And so I figured, okay, well, they must have some sort of a recording studio there. But when I arrived, they told me, no, we don't have any such thing, and they engaged me in all different types of services. But then I was very surprised when Vaibhavi, the Mataji, informed me, and I was very happy that she invited me to participate. The first thing that Charu Prabhu engaged me in doing was narrating stories from the Back to Godhead magazine entitled How I Came to Krishna Consciousness. And I did several stories with him, and eventually I actually ended up in Spanish Fork for a short time, broadcasting on the radio station. But in all the time that I spent with Charu Prabhu and in the recording studio, it really wasn't all that long, but in all the time I did spend doing these recordings, I never once told my story. But recently I've been requested to do that, so here it goes. When I was very young, I had a very unusual dream. This glass, scary monster man was chasing me in this dream, and I dove down into a ditch, and I was scared out of my mind, and then I woke up. But when I woke up, I envisioned what appeared to be a glass lady practically everywhere I looked. I was just a small boy at the time. And I went out of my room, and I went down the stairs we had in that house. And everywhere I would look, I would see the face of this beautiful glass lady. I mean, it looked like a lady to me anyhow. And excuse me, I went down and I sat on the couch, and I was looking out the sliding glass windows of the sliding doors. And while I was looking in our backyard, this beautiful glass lady, I thought it was a lady, walked into the yard, sat down, cross-legged, and just looked over at me and smiled. And I was just totally in awe. And I was looking at this. And I just stared for about, it seemed like a half an hour. And then all of a sudden, this personality stood up and just walked off. And then moments later, my parents came down the stairs and told me, oh, no, it was just all a dream. But then, many, many years later, when I was 21 and I joined the movement, I started seeing pictures in the temple room. The temple room in Los Angeles was so beautiful. It was like not Los Angeles, also Los Angeles is so beautiful, but in Honolulu, it was like an art gallery, a very small temple room, and pictures lined up on both sides of the walls, and that's where I joined. So I was looking at these pictures, and I was remembering, this is what what I thought was a lady looked like. It was Krsna. That's what it looked like to me. So later in life, when I was in 4th grade, my father decided that I needed to be put into a private boarding school. And in this particular private boarding school in Vancouver, British Columbia, I would often have to go to a Catholic church, because whenever your parents didn't come and pick you up on the weekends, they would take us to a Catholic church and line us up in the front with our little uniforms and ties, and we had to sit there and listen to a Catholic sermon. And I'm sorry, I have to say, I was bored out of my mind every single time. I hated it. So later, I was about 11 years old, my parents had moved to Tucson, Arizona. And so my father, by the way, he was built like a house. He was 6'8", He was huge. And he had a temper like you can't even imagine. And one day, my mother was so afraid that he was going to become violent with me that she rather sent me up to where my sister was playing with her little friend. She had called their parents and asked if it was okay if I went up there to stay for some time. Now, her friends were very staunch, or my sister's friends' family were very staunch Baptists, Christian Baptists. And it was Sunday, and they were heading for church. And they invited me to join them. And I told them that there is no way in hell I'm going to that church. They didn't mind. They told me, okay, well, we're going to leave, and you can stay here and hang out all you like. And they left a Bible in the living room where I was at the time. And I didn't even look at the thing. When they returned from church, they strategically located themselves within earshot of where I was in the living room, in their dining room, and they began a discussion of the chapter of Revelation and the prophecies therein. And the more I listened, the more I became intrigued and captivated and astounded. And eventually I couldn't help. I had to go to the kitchen. I had to find out, what is this? What is this all about? And they began to lay it out for me. And I was just so much interested in that the next thing you know, I had a King James version of the Bible with my name engraved in gold on it, along with a paraphrased version and a Bible concordance dictionary in one hand and a whole handful of Bible tracts in the other. And on my way to school, there was a park where hippies would hang out and smoke pot. And I would stop there every day and I would preach to all the hippies about salvation. And then in school, I was getting into all kinds of trouble with the teachers and eventually even the principal for my preaching. They all called me preacher. And it got back to my father and he was outraged. Now, he's Jewish, but he's the kind of Jewish person that what that means is bagels and lox on Saturday and lighting a candle for his father when he passed away, and that's the extent of it. And before he left this world in 1999, his philosophy had become that if there even is a God, I hate him. So when he found out about me preaching in the school, he was naturally outraged. And when it came time for the class on evolution that was mandatory, which I naturally decided not to take, he flew off the handle. And the principal insisted and informed my father that if I didn't take the class, I was going to be expelled. So my father made me take that class. Needless to say, I failed. Then, as time went on, my mother and father, they got divorced. And my mother remarried this wealthy individual who turned out to be a complete nut. And I sort of strayed away from my practices, what they call backsliding. As a matter of fact, something very unusual happened. I had totally strayed away from my practices and became very much more materialistic again, and practically rejected my, could call sadhana, my Christian sadhana and practices of Christianity. And he took us, this Jack Carlos Kester, J.C. Kester, took us to a little city, McAllen in Texas. And the day we left, there was a hurricane in Tucson, where I was. And when I arrived there, shortly thereafter, there was what you could call a plague. I mean, you can check it out in the almanac. I'm sure it's there. There was a plague of mosquitoes. When you would walk outside, the mosquitoes would attack you. And there'd be like 20 of them all over your body. And you're running around, flicking off all these mosquitoes. And it got so bad, my lymph nodes got swollen. And then, it's like something out of the Bible, the frogs started coming. And then everywhere you looked, the frogs getting smashed by the wheels of the cars and all over the place. Come and eat the mosquitoes. And then one day I got this idea to use my stepfather, Jack's, sun tanning machine, and I would put it on for a little while, and I'd look and I didn't see anything. I didn't read the instructions, mind you. So I put it on for a little longer and a little longer and a little longer, and then I started feeling, okay, well, it feels like it's having some effect. But I didn't realize that you're only supposed to do it a certain amount of time, and then, it'll eventually, tan your skin. But because I had it on so long, eventually it started to blister my skin. And so my whole face was just one big blister. And there was just one thing after another after another. I could go on and on about that, but I want to get back. I want to get into how I came to Krishna consciousness, which all this is leading up to. So eventually, I ended up back in Hawaii. I had joined the military and became a medical specialist. I was in Vancouver, BC. I did a lot of traveling. And during the time San Salvador began, I was concerned that it would turn into another Vietnam. They'd start doing the draft. And, even though I was in Canada, I didn't want to be a draft dodger the rest of my life. And if they ended up drafting and I had to go, then, they pick your, what you call MOS, your job. So I decided, no, I would rather become a medical specialist. And so that's what I did. And I liked that. And so when I was discharged, they sent me to Hawaii to be a medical specialist. And when I was discharged, eventually, a couple years later, I turned 21. And one of the problems with being a medical specialist in the Army is that they teach you to do so many different things, but you're not licensed to do any of those things. And so when I got out, I was lucky if I was qualified to clean a bedpan. And I hated that. I enjoyed being a medical specialist, but I hated not being qualified to do anything when I got out. And I had wanted to become a paramedic. I took the EMT course, but I had no other training than that. And so at the same time, I had become addicted to what they call pakalolo. Pakalolo is the Hawaiian term for marijuana. And this job that I couldn't stand doing as a civilian was boring, and it didn't pay enough to pay for my pakalolo habit. So I ended up abandoning that, and believe it or not, this is all leading to how I came to Krishna consciousness, mind you. I ended up selling pakalolo in Waikiki. I was on an avenue called Kuhio, one of the main drags in Waikiki, and across the street from where I was selling the pakalolo, at that time, back in 1983, early in 83, the police had arranged for all the prostitutes to do their business in one section of town, right there on Kuhio Avenue, across the street from where I was sitting, doing my thing at the time. And there was a hot dog stand nearby where I was sitting, where the prostitutes would come over to get their hot dogs. And one night, one of them walked over to me and said, "We've been watching you, and we noticed that you're not doing very well out here. And we were wondering if you would consider helping us, and at the same time could make a lot of money." She explained that all the desk clerks in Waikiki knew all of them, and they were not willing to rent them the rooms that they needed. So what they would do is they'd find some straight-laced looking guy like me, get them to rent them the room, and then in this way they would do their business, and they would pay the guy $10 every time. And initially I was thoroughly disgusted. I had some religious background. I wanted to be a paramedic. I didn't want to be a pimp. I didn't want anything to do with this type of occupation. But eventually it started growing in my mind. And I started thinking that, God, if I get 10 girls a night doing this thing, that's $100 a day, tax-free, and I could become a paramedic in no time. Turns out I ended up making like around $500 a night. But I was never more nervous in my life. And these girls, they're not very peaceful. They used to cause so much calamity that every night I would get kicked out of the hotel. I ended up in practically every hotel in Waikiki. But what I would do is I would get these hotel rooms that had living room and bedrooms, so I would hang out in the living room. And I decided at one point that I'm 21 years old now, so it's time to give up my petty fear of something I've always been very interested in, but always afraid of, and that is psychic awareness. When I was about 18 years old, I had become a little inclined towards the hippie type of mentality of pacifism and love and peace. And I used to discuss philosophically, about how to save this world from war and pestilence and violence and all the horrors in this world. And it occurred to me that it's obviously going to take a miracle. Many miracles. And I wanted to be part of that. So, I started off by picking up a book called How to Develop Your Psychic Awareness by Kathleen Ray. And it turned out that the book recommended an ancient yoga known as chakra yoga. So while the prostitutes were in the bedroom doing their thing, I was in the living room becoming more and more deeply involved in intense meditation and yoga. I automatically and very naturally started practicing asanas and different sitting postures, pranayams, and also pranayams, breathing techniques, which weren't even mentioned in the book. It just somehow or other I just started doing that for I don't know what reason. It just came to me. And I found myself becoming less inclined to eat meat, and I was becoming less attached to smoking marijuana, much more each and every day. I was becoming less and less involved in that. One night, a night that changed my life. I cannot explain why, but for some reason, the usual 50 girls didn't show up anytime throughout the night. And I found myself becoming more and more deeply absorbed in my meditation. And then all of a sudden, I had what appeared to me to be a vision of Jesus on the cross. And I focused on his face, and I noticed that he didn't seem to be in any agony. He didn't seem to be at all angry. And he would look up with this look in his face that, like he's asking God, please don't punish these people. He did this, and he would look down with such compassion. It was so intense that it occurred to me that this scripture that I had been reading, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It all started to make sense to me, that he was rightful in his position as someone who is so purely devoted to God that he didn't want to see them suffer as a result of what they were doing to him. And God, of course, is rightful in his position of thinking, how the hell are they doing this to Jesus? And so he was right to be very angry. A very intense thing that I was witnessing. And to just see this look on his face, it was so intense. It literally brought tears. I was crying like a baby for hours. And then at one point I decided, that's it. I need guidance. There's just no question about it. I need guidance now. And so I packed up a few things and I took off. I got into a taxi cab and I started flying all over Oahu. And I would visit all these different centers and that day. And I was inquiring. Somehow or other I got it into my mind that I had begun this mission in a previous life. And that I hadn't finished it, and I needed to continue, so I needed someone to do a past life regression. That's what I was thinking would be the solution. I decided that everything that I had, I made a lot of money, but I spent a lot also, so I had about $700-800, and I decided that's it. Everything that I have I will give in exchange for whatever it takes to enlighten me about this life's mission. And eventually I ended up speaking with a hypnotist whose office I later learned was down the street from the Hare Krishna temple. And he told me that he was unqualified to do what I was asking, but that there was this psychic named Willie who did his business in a banyan tree, a hollowed out banyan tree, in the Kuhio Mall. You never guess where. Yes, back in Waikiki, where I had begun. So I ended up back in Waikiki, and I don't know why, but I got out of the taxi about 2 blocks away from the Kuhio Mall where Willie was supposed to be, and I met some people out on the street there in front of Liberty House on Kuhio Avenue, on Kalakaua. This was Kalakaua. The Kuhio Mall stretches all the way from Kuhio to Kalakaua, the 2 main drags. Kalakaua is the one that runs right along the beach. And anyways, I met these people out there, and the way they looked to me, for some reason I got the idea that they were Moonies. And it occurred to me that perhaps they have a master. See, I was very much enamored by this television series Kung Fu, Kwai Chang Caine, David Carradine, and all that. And so I wanted to know if they had a master who could do this past life regression for me and enlighten me about this life's mission. And they assured me, oh yes, we have the master. Don't worry about that. So I told them, okay, well, I come out here to see this psychic, and if you're still around when I'm finished, we'll discuss it further. So I went to see Willie, and Willie wasn't there. It wasn't his shift yet. The one that was there told me that Willie won't be there for another half hour, but he could see that I'm the type of individual that in a previous life or previous lives I would inquire from authorities, and if I wasn't completely convinced by their authenticity, I would cut their heads off. And I wasn't too impressed. Later I figure, yeah, maybe I was that kind of person, and regretfully. So I walked back out to the sidewalk, and I made the biggest decision I've ever made in my entire life. I literally stood there for 5 minutes. I looked over at the Moonies, who I thought were Moonies, and then it occurred to me that I still had a bag, a quarter-ounce bag of very potent marijuana. Hawaii was known for having the most, back then especially, for having the most potent marijuana in the entire world. And I thought to myself, I've been at this all day since, like 4 o'clock in the morning, and then I was up all night the night before, and I don't seem to be making any progress here. Maybe I should just go to the beach, smoke a joint, and call it a night. Get a hotel room, call it a night, try again tomorrow. Or maybe I should talk to the Moonies. And I really was perplexed. I didn't know what I was going to do, what I should do. And I looked at the beach, and I looked back over at those guys that I thought were Moonies. And then I decided, oh well, the beach will still be there. The Moonies might be leaving soon. So I went over and I talked to them. And that's when I learned that the people I was talking to were members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They were distributing their literatures and accepting donations. There was Shari Prabhu, Hanuman Prabhu, and Daiva Prabhu. And they invited me to come to the temple. And I accepted. Shortly thereafter, a very heavy-set man with a set of coveralls and a baseball cap drove up in a big old Silverado truck and picked them all up. And there were Matajis across the street, Lolita and Vishaka, and they all hopped into the truck. I believe Jambavati was there too. Anyways, and as we were getting into the truck, Hanuman introduced me to the driver, whose name was Balavasena. Balavasena. And he told me, "This is your master." And I thought to myself, yeah, right. My concept of a master was Master Po in the series Kung Fu, and this guy didn't look anything like that. So we were driving to the temple, and when we got there, I noticed the property was very beautiful. This temple was a mansion donated by Alfred Ford, who is Henry Ford's great-grandson, now known as Ambarish Prabhu. And the property is just beautiful. You can find pictures of it online. And you'll see, I've learned that actually they have this banyan tree in the back that a horticulturist named Horace Clay claims is the biggest banyan tree on the whole island. And actually there's an ashram. Back then it was the Brahmacharini ashram inside the tree. It's so big. And there's mango trees and lychee and lilikoi, and they had these tulsi bushes growing in the front of there was a whole circle of tulsi bushes. It was very beautiful. When I got out of the truck, I stood in this spot, and I became overwhelmed by the atmosphere. I began to feel just like I felt when I was a little kid during Christmas time, what we call the Christmas spirit. And I was just really relishing that feeling. Then I was introduced to the temple commander named Chaitanya, who they all called Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And I later learned why. He's very, very sincere, very, very nice devotee. And he began to take me on a tour of the temple. Eventually we got separated, and I started meeting some of the other devotees. And I'm sorry, I have to say, I was not very impressed. And they were telling me, "Oh, you don't belong here, you don't belong there." And I noticed so many different things that I was becoming a little dismayed about. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to go back out to that spot where I was when I first arrived, because that's where I was experiencing this wonderful feeling that I'm not experiencing anymore. And I was very confused about the whole thing. And while I was standing out there, all of a sudden, Balavasena, the big heavy-set driver that I was told was my master, he waves over at me from off in the distance, and he says, "I know what you're thinking. I'll be with you in a moment." So I was thinking, oh, maybe they read minds or something. That's interesting. And so he took me for a drive in that Silverado truck. Most momentous occasion of my life. We were driving around the Tantalus foothills. And the roads in these foothills that overlook Honolulu wind all around. And he was driving very fast. Balavasena always drove very fast. Matter of fact, I had to go to court for him a number of times and pay his tickets. A whole other story. Anyways, he was driving very, very fast. And usually whenever I'm with somebody driving very fast, I was afraid. Even though I drove like a maniac back then, I was still I would have been very afraid. But for some reason, I don't know why, I just felt very comfortable with him. Even though he was driving so fast in all these windy roads. And I swear, while he was preaching to me, he was telling me all about the philosophy, the culture, the lifestyle, giving me an entire synopsis of the entire philosophy for like 4 hours. He was preaching this most amazing information to me. And I swear, he never looked away from me. He had his hand on the wheel, and it looked like he was looking straight at me the entire time. We drove to, eventually after the long drive around Tantalus, where he pointed to Honolulu and explained, how degraded materialistic life is and how this whole culture is doomed. Explained so many things about the philosophy to me. That I'm not this body. Explained the 3 modes of material nature. Who Krsna is, why they chant Hare Krishna, everything. He explained so many wonderful things to me. And after we took this long drive, he drove to Govinda's, showed me they even have a juice factory where they had these freshly squeezed juices called Govinda's juices that they distribute in all the stores all over the island. And I got a nice orange juice. And then we headed back to the temple. And after all of that, I made the decision. This is what I've been looking for. These people, they are actually living the life that we read about in the scriptures. It's not just a Sunday deal. It's a lifestyle. They dress the part, they live the part, they have services every day. I mean, it's like something right out of the scripture. And the moment of truth had come. I told Balavasain about it, that morning I had decided that whoever could direct me on the right path, that I had just become convinced about. That's it, everything. They have everything. You take everything. And believe it or not, Balavasain tried his best to talk me out of giving him everything that I had. He explained, you're not, how could you be sure? You've only just met us. Why don't you come visit the temple? No, that's it. I want to become immediately a monk in the monastery, a brahmachari. And I want you to take everything. That's what I vowed this morning, and now I want you to take all his money, take everything that I have. It all belongs to you now. He said, no, I don't want your money. I said, no, that's it. I insist. 3 times he tried so hard to convince me, you're not sure you may want to. No, that's it. I insist. So, okay. If you want to, I'll take them, use it in Krishna's service. That night, because he had explained so much about materialistic attachment and the attachment materialistic people have with the type of image they try to create with the grooming of their hair, that the monks, they renounce that. The monks, the priests, they renounce that, and they shave it off. So I wanted to renounce immediately. I moved into the brahmachari ashram, and I shaved my head, and I shaved it all. I didn't even leave a sikha. And I remember that I shaved so hard to get rid of all this materialistic attachment. I thought that would do it. That I had cuts all over my head. The next morning, I stayed up practically all the night. I was so excited. Of course, every morning they have the Mangal Arati morning services. And so I got up for the morning program, took our cold shower, snapped the ignorance right out of us. And when I arrived in the temple room and the devotees were all gathering, I saw that there were 2 rows of men on one side of the room, all dressed in the traditional Vedic attire, and 2 rows of men on the other side of the room. And there were a number of Matajis, women, in the back. And Narahari Maharaj, who was the temple president at the time, began to play the mridanga. He happened to be a musician before he became a devotee, and he was very expert at playing the mridanga drum. And then I noticed they started with the hand cymbals, the kartals. And at this particular program, there was someone playing the harmonium as well, hand pump organ. And even the tambura was being played. And they started singing these most beautiful prayers in this ancient language. Narahari Maharaj would sing, Sang Saradaba Nalali Daloka. And then everybody would join, Sang Saradaba Nalali Daloka. It was just so beautiful. And then the deity doors opened. And I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see any of the deities at first, very clearly at all, because they were burning camphor and myrrh and frankincense. And the whole altar was filled with smoke. And when they opened the doors, the whole temple room, it was just this beautiful fragrance. It was so nice. And they kept singing and they were swaying back and forth. And then about 20 minutes into the program, a whole bunch of children started scurrying into the room. They had a Gurukula at that temple at the time. And there was about 15 or 20 maybe children that scurried into the room. And I looked at these children and I looked at their faces. You know how they say the face is the index to the mind, eyes are the windows to the soul? I was very keen on that. And I looked at their faces. And it occurred to me that these children, they look more pure than any children I've ever seen. And I actually began to pray at that point that please help me to understand what is this experience I'm having. I felt like I had been transported back in time to when the Israelite masses were offering prayers to God. It was just unbelievably ecstatic, like nothing I've ever experienced before in my life. And so I was praying like that. And then all of a sudden, my whole body literally began to vibrate. I was surprised. And it was just vibrating. And it was so relaxing. And then it subsided. And a few seconds later, it happened again, not quite as intense as the first time. And months later, I came across a passage in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion, explaining these shadow attachment, they call them, ecstasies, a little taste of what it's like to be a pure devotee that you're encouraged by. And also I've read about how some who are very fortunate, when they see the deity or hear the Panchatattva mantra, the chanting of Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vatsari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, it causes trembling. So I got confirmation that this was actually a bona fide experience that I was having. And later that year, 1983, I took initiation, and Rameshwar Prabhu told me that my mission is to find Gauranga Prema and distribute Gauranga Prema, the love of the most merciful, munificent, and magnanimous manifestation of God freely. Therefore, my name is now Gauranga Prema Das, servant of the most merciful manifestation of God, also known as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who distributes love freely. Hare Krishna.